discuss Coleridge's concept of fancy and imagination as enunciated in the chapter 13 of Biographia Literaria. Marks, 10-12. Answer. Coleridge's theory of imagination is a world-illustrious theory which he included in the chapter 13 of his Literaria Biographia 1817, a work on literary aesthetics. His theory is characterized by greater depth, penetration, and philosophical subtlety. Coleridge classifies imagination into two categories: primary and secondary. Primary imagination is merely the power of receiving impressions of the external world through senses. Coleridge calls it the living power and prime agent of all human perception. It is a spontaneous act of every human mind. The mind receives impressions and sensations from the outside world unconsciously and involuntarily, and reduces them to shape and size, and thus the mind is able to form a clear image of the outside world. It is in this way that clear and coherent perception becomes possible. Secondary imagination, on the other hand, is a peculiar and distinctive attribute of an artist. It is the root of all poetic creation. It is the poetic vision, the faculty that a poet has to idealize and to unify. Its raw material is the sensations and impressions supplied to it by primary imagination. The difference between primary imagination and secondary imagination is not in kind but in degree. Secondary imagination is more active, more a result of volition, more conscious and more voluntary than the primary one. Primary imagination is universal while secondary imagination is a peculiar privilege enjoyed by the artist. In his theory of imagination, Coleridge also speaks about fancy. He regards fancy to be inferior to imagination. It is not a creative power at all. It only combines what it perceives into beautiful shapes, but unlike imagination it does not fuse and unify. Fancy arbitrarily brings together images, and even when brought together, they continue to retain their separate and individual properties. They receive no coloring or modification from the mind. According to Coleridge, it is merely mechanical juxtaposition and not a chemical fusion. Fancy is the drapery of poetic genius, but imagination is its very soul which forms all into one graceful and intelligent whole. Coleridge owed his interest in the study of imagination to Wordsworth. But Wordsworth was interested only in the practice of poetry and he considered only the impact of imagination on poetry. Coleridge, on the other hand, is interested in the theory of imagination. He is the first critic to study the nature of imagination and examine its role in creative activities. Secondly, while Wordsworth uses fancy and imagination almost as synonymous, Coleridge is the first critic to distinguish between them and define their respective roles. Thirdly, unlike Wordsworth, he also distinguishes between primary imagination and secondary imagination. Thus, Coleridge's theory of imagination is a valuable asset in the realms of literary aesthetics. It has drawn the attention of readers and critics for ages, being one of the much discussed topics in literary criticism. Finished. Please subscribe to the channel for more updates of ready-made notes on English literature. Also, please share this channel to help any student pursue a degree in English literature. Thank you very much for watching the video. Please do not forget to like and comment.